My name is Hassan, and for most of my life, I was absolutely certain that I knew God. I'm not talking about a faith that only appears in difficult times. I'm talking about something much deeper, a certainty that guided everything in me. My thoughts, my steps, my breathing. I was born into Islam. It wasn't a choice. It was the world I grew up in, the atmosphere of my childhood. The house where I lived was always filled with the sounds of the call to prayer. It was like the background music of life. While my mother made tea, my father recited the Quran in that solemn voice, as if each word carried a sacred weight. I didn't just follow religion, it was a part of me. It was like breathing, natural, constant, essential. I grew up among the columns of a mosque, where the whispers of prayer seemed to lull the soul. When I grew older, I became an Imam, not out of vanity, but because I truly believed that this was my purpose. This was what I was meant to do. I recited the Quran with reverence. I counseled couples in crisis. I taught young people to fear and love God. The community saw me as an example, a man of faith, steadfast, respected. And to tell the truth, I saw myself that way too. I would wake up before sunrise just to purify myself and say my prayers. Even in the bitter cold, the sacred words came out of my mouth naturally, as if they had been engraved in my heart forever. If someone had doubts, they came to me. If a young person felt lost, I showed them the way. When a Christian told me that Jesus was God, I listened respectfully but corrected them firmly. To me, that was a mistake, a serious deviation. Jesus was a prophet, yes, important, beloved, but God? No, never. It was my duty to protect the truth of monotheism, to defend Tawheed with all my soul. And look, it never crossed my mind that I could be wrong, not for a second. Why? Because my life was, in my eyes, upright. I fasted during Ramadan zealously. I helped the poor with part of what I earned. I avoided excesses, vices, and pride. I felt at peace, protected, safe. The respect of people, the silence of prayers, the weight of the words of the Quran, all of this only reinforced the certainty that I was on the right path. For decades, that was enough for me. I never questioned it. I never doubted it. In my mind, I didn't just serve God, I knew Him. I was almost certain of His pleasure. It was as if we were in sync. But life, oh, life has a peculiar way of bending us. Time passed. My hair, darkened by time, turned white. My legs, firm during long moments of prayer, began to tremble. My steps no longer had the same vigor. At first, it was just a strange tiredness, a fatigue that not even rest could solve. Then came the pains, silent, persistent. The visits to the doctors became frequent. The diagnoses became more and more serious. Progressive failure, tired organs, a body that could no longer keep up with the soul. But even so, I was not scared. I thought, it's just a test. God tests the righteous. I've told so many people this before. Now it's my turn. And I continued, with faith, with strength, or at least trying. But my body began to give way, even before my faith did. The nights became endless. The fevers drained me. My prayers, once full of life, became broken whispers, and yet I held on, because deep down I believed that God was watching me, that at some point He would restore me. It was just another test. I would pass it soon, but something changed. And it wasn't in my body, it was in my soul. In the silence of that hospital room, the days were getting too long. But it wasn't the silence outside that bothered me. It was the silence inside. That unshakable certainty, which had always been with me, began to slip through the fingers of my soul. And then, without wanting to, without planning, a question appeared in my heart. I didn't say it out loud. It wasn't a cry of doubt or a burst of rebellion. It was just an uncomfortable whisper inside me. What if I'm wrong? Not about everything, but about what really matters. I tried to ignore that thought. I fought it as if it were an evil temptation. But it came back. It always came back. In the sleepless nights, amid the noise of the machines and the whispers of the nurses. It came back with the fever. It came back in silence. A silence that, curiously, didn't come from outside. but from inside me, as if something was slowly falling apart, as if the security I had always had was being ripped away, piece by piece. And then it just happened. There was no warning, no light from the sky, no voices from beyond, nothing spectacular. It was just the end. My breath began to falter. The sounds around me grew distant, as if the world were moving away from me. The beeping of the machines stopped, the faces disappeared, and everything went silent. But it wasn't a dark void. It wasn't light either. There was no ground, no sky, but I was still there, strangely aware. I knew my body was there, cold, still, but I was no longer part of it. It was like floating outside of time, as if I had been taken from the reality I knew and placed in a place that made no sense. I tried to pray. I tried to remember the verses that had always been my refuge, but I had no mouth, no sound. Yet my mind was whole. I was me. I was Hassan. I knew everything, except that nothing was the same anymore. And it was there that the real journey began. It was like stepping through an invisible veil. I couldn't tell exactly when it happened, but one thing I knew: once it happened, there was no going back. Suddenly, I could see everything, not with my eyes, but with something much bigger, a consciousness more alive than anything I had ever felt in my life. I looked down, and there was my body, frail, pale, motionless in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that were now silent. The monitor screen showed a flat line, nothing, no sign of life. The lights that had previously twinkled like artificial stars had gone out. I saw the nurses running around desperate. One was trying to revive me with her trembling hands on my chest. Another was shouting something, her eyes wide open. But I was up there, watching everything. And the strangest thing? I was calm, completely calm, as if all that running around wasn't about me anymore. There was no fear, no attachment. It was as if the part of me that had always tried to control everything had finally let go, accepted, not as an end, but as a beginning. I felt something pulling me, not hard. It was gentle, as if an invisible current was wrapping around me and taking me somewhere I didn't know. But I knew, deep down in my soul, that I needed to go. I didn't try to resist. I didn't even know how. The space around me was strange. It had no shape, but it felt dense, full. It wasn't empty. The silence there wasn't hollow. It was alive, intense, as if every inch of it was filled with something I couldn't name, but that filled me completely. In my mind, I thought that if death really existed, I would see something familiar. Maybe my father, maybe the angels mentioned in the hadiths, maybe something sacred, in line with everything I had been taught. But what I found looked nothing like that. The hospital faded away like mist in the sun, and then I felt it, a presence. I couldn't see it with my eyes. It wasn't a physical form, but it was someone. Someone was there, waiting, and in that moment, a shiver ran through my consciousness. It wasn't fear, it was reverence, deep respect. It was like standing before something or someone far greater than anything my theological mind could comprehend. It was a holiness so intense, so real, that I felt naked, not in body but in soul, as if every thought, every intention, every hidden pride or camouflaged doubt had been laid bare. There was no hiding anything. I looked down at my body again. It seemed distant now, almost strange. The shell was still there, but something vital was gone. And even with all the nurses' efforts to bring that flesh back, I knew that was no longer me. It was there that the truth fell upon me with the weight of a deafening silence. I had died. It wasn't sleep, it wasn't trance, it wasn't a symbolic dream. I had truly crossed the boundary between now and forever. And to my surprise, I didn't panic. On the contrary, I remained silent, a different silence, broken inside, bent over by reality. Everything I had been, Imam, leader, counselor, defender of the faith, now seemed like a role, a character in a play that had already ended. The stage was gone, the curtain had fallen. There, time didn't work the same way. It didn't move, it didn't wait. Everything happened at the same time, as if past, present, and future were collapsed into a single point. And the more I was carried by that invisible current, the more something inside me awakened. Something that had always been there, but that I had never felt so clearly. It was a new certainty, a certainty that told me, without words, this is not the end. It's just the beginning. It was there, in that space that seemed like an abyss, and at the same time a cradle that I felt. I didn't see, I simply felt. Someone was watching me, not with ordinary eyes, but with a presence so intense, so pure, that it made me feel tiny, like dust. As if, faced with that sanctity, I knew instinctively that there was no way to hide, and no way to explain myself. It wasn't judgment, it wasn't condemnation, but it was truth. A truth so clear, so clean, so piercing, that my soul wanted to shrink back, as if to say, I'm not ready. And I wasn't. In my mind I wondered, where are the gardens? Where is the peaceful paradise I always believed awaited me? Where are the angels in white robes and serene faces? But none of these things appeared. Instead, I was taken, not forced, but led, to a place that shattered every image I had formed over years of teaching and devotion. The force pulling me was calm, but undeniable, as if the universe itself had decided to move me. And the more I was carried, the more everything around me disappeared. The hospital, the sounds, my body, everything was disappearing like smoke in the wind. And suddenly, I understood. Everything was changing, including me. And there I was, Hassan, the man who spent his entire life talking about what comes after death, realizing in my own soul that nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for this. I didn't go straight to heaven. I didn't pass through fluffy clouds or see golden gates. The physical world simply disappeared. Time, space, sounds, weight, they all disappeared. And then I entered a place hidden behind what we call reality. It was as if, until then, I had lived only on the surface of a much greater mystery. There was no ground. There was no sky. But I existed, more awake than ever. The space around me was strange, empty and full at the same time, silent, yet echoing, dark, yet filled with an invisible light. And right in the center of it all, I felt it. I didn't hear it. I didn't see it. I sensed someone there. It wasn't a thought, nor a religious idea. It was someone real, alive, conscious. A presence so strong that it seemed to touch my soul with a light that cut through. It wasn't soft. It was intense. That light pierced through everything. My secrets, my pride, my unhealed wounds, my prayers that came out beautifully from my mouth, but sometimes empty from my heart, and there was nowhere to run. But curiously, that presence did not abandon me. It remained there, firm, hot as fire, bright as light, heavy as glory, holy. And that's when a brutal truth hit me. I had spent my entire life talking about God, seeking God, defending God, without ever actually standing before Him. This revelation broke me apart inside. I, the Imam, the teacher, the guide, I, who knew verse by verse, who taught others, who believed I lived a pure faith. Now I realized that deep down I knew ideas about God, but I did not know God. I knew doctrine, I knew rules, but I did not know who He was. And when I thought I couldn't feel anything anymore, everything changed again. The silence around grew thicker, as if even the universe had held its breath. And then something even stronger, brighter, more personal emerged. It was at that moment that I saw Him. At first I didn't understand. It was light, but not a cold light. It was golden, alive. It didn't just illuminate, it revealed. And out of that light, a figure began to emerge. It didn't walk, it didn't float, it just was there, as if the universe itself was reverently letting it appear. As the shape became clearer, I understood this was no symbolic vision. I was standing before someone real, alive, supreme. He was a man, but at the same time, he was much more than that. He was wrapped in purity, but not as if he were wearing something pure. It was part of him. The very light around him seemed to bow before him. And in that moment, before any name was even spoken, I knew it was Jesus, but not the Jesus of religious comparisons, not the prophet of my tradition, nor that name repeated in interreligious debates. It was the living Christ, glorified, radiant, so absolutely holy that my soul trembled. He didn't speak, but his eyes pierced me like a sword and a medicine at the same time. It was as if I had been expected the whole time. Within those eyes was eternity, justice, but also mercy. A love so powerful, so absolute, that for a moment I thought I couldn't bear it, that I would be crushed by the sheer weight of that love. But I wasn't, because along with all that glory came a grace that cannot be described, a firm peace, a certainty that required no explanation. Jesus looked at me, not with contempt, not with coldness, but with a love that consumes, that cleanses, that transforms. And in that moment, everything I had believed in, the entire belief system I had built, all the pride I had in being a religious leader, it all came crashing down, because I understood. Truth was not a concept. The truth was a person. And she was right in front of me. I knew right away who he was. Not because someone told me, not because I saw a picture, not because I argued logically. I knew because my soul recognized him. It was as if an ancient truth, buried beneath layers of doctrine, pride, and religious striving, had finally awakened. And it didn't happen gently. It was like a bolt of lightning splitting the sky of the soul in two, exposing everything at once. I recognized him, not with my mind, but with my spirit. A part of me that had never had a voice until that moment knew exactly who he was. And my first reaction was to look away. Not because he was scary, but because his purity exposed me completely. It was like being naked in front of eternity. I wanted to hide, shrink, erase, but there was nowhere to run because he was the truth, and I was inside it. That man there was not a prophet. He was not a wise master. He was not an enlightened man among many others. He was Jesus, not the name I treated with academic reverence, not the distant figure of interreligious debates. He was alive, present, glorified, and my soul, upon seeing him, prostrated itself, even without a body, even without ground. It fell inside. Confusion was the first human emotion that struck me. How was this possible? How could everything I had believed, taught, stood for so long be wrong? How could someone I had always respected as a prophet now stand before me, not as a messenger, but as the source, as God himself? My mind tried to resist. Doctrinal walls rose up, verses, arguments, ready-made phrases, all of this piled up in my head, but nothing came out of my mouth. No defense made sense. Before him, theology was silent, dogmas evaporated, and pride died. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, and that look began to break down the walls inside me. It wasn't a look of condemnation. It wasn't mockery, nor demand. It was a look that burned and healed at the same time. And that's when the surrender began. Not the kind that's forced out of fear or guilt, but the kind that comes when the truth appears, and you simply have no reason to fight anymore. Jesus didn't accuse me. He didn't point the finger. He didn't say, "You were wrong." He just looked at me with eyes filled with compassion and justice at the same time. And I knew. He knew me. He knew who I was. And more than that, I felt like he had always been coming to meet me, not just there, all my life. And then he spoke, but it wasn't a voice like the one we're used to. It was like vibration. It was light transformed into words. It was a sacred breath that passed through everything. It wasn't loud, but it filled everything, as if the entire universe was falling silent just to hear him. "You have known part of the truth," he said. "Now I will show you all of it." These words didn't just enter my ears, they went through me. It was as if they had been written for me before I even existed. And with them, my entire history opened up before me, not as a nation, but as a revelation. I saw every prayer I prayed with sincerity, but without direction. I saw every teaching I preached with zeal, but without life. I saw the faces of the people who listened to me, who trusted me, who sought God in the words I spoke, and I realized that even the right words, when disconnected from the right person, can lead nowhere. It wasn't that everything I had experienced was a lie, but it was incomplete, a shadow, a reflection, an echo. I had walked close to the sacred, but without knowing the source. And now, there before me, Jesus was not showing me a path to God. He was the path. He was God himself. This revelation broke me inside, but along with the pain came something I didn't expect: grace. He didn't look at me coldly or with disappointment. He looked at me as if he had waited patiently, as if he had always known who I was, as if he had continued to look for me even when I cried out against him. Part of me still struggled. The old system within me cried out for logic, explanation, coherence with everything I had preached. How could it be him? How was this man I had called a prophet now, standing before me, revealing himself to be God himself? But he didn't demand answers from me. He already knew them all, and more than that, he understood me. Not with condescension, but with a patient love, a love that has no end. And I cried, not with physical tears, but with my soul, a deep cry of regret, of shame for the years lost, for the messages I brought to people that, deep down, only connected them to a religion, and not to the Savior. It hurt to see that I had been so close, and at the same time so far away. But in the midst of this sadness, there came a joy that took me apart again, a joy so absurd, so strong, that it almost hurt. Because even after everything, I was there, and he received me. Jesus took no steps. He didn't need to. His light, his presence came to me, and then he entered, not with violence, but with love. A love so deep that it seemed to fill every empty corner inside me. And in that moment I understood. He wasn't just showing me who I had been. He was beginning to remake me. He was everything. The truth I had been searching for, the light I had been missing, the God my heart had always wanted to know, even when my mind insisted on denying him, was now before me. And it was only there in that encounter that I began to truly live. Jesus didn't condemn me, but he didn't pat me on the head either. His holiness was so absolute that he didn't need to raise his voice or point out flaws. His mere presence was enough. It exposed me from within in such a profound way that it hurt. But it wasn't cruel. It was a different kind of pain, holy, like a surgery that cuts with precision, not to punish, but to heal. You were sincere, he said, but sincerity without truth is still being lost. And you were lost, Hassan. The way he said my name took me apart. It wasn't the way my mother had affectionately called me, nor the way my disciples had respectfully addressed me. It was something deeper, scary even, as if he had known me since before I existed, as if every hidden thought, every whispered prayer, every solitary tear had been accompanied by him all along. And then it hit me. He had always known me. He had always waited for me. He had been there when I thought I was closest to God. He had been there in my strict fasts, in my fervent recitations of the Quran, in the tears I had shed, seeking a presence that, no matter how hard I tried, never seemed to truly fill me. And there, before him, I began to cry, not out of fear, but out of truth. Because for the first time I was completely exposed, but without shame. It was a beautiful, liberating truth. It was like I was breathing for the first time. I didn't yet know what he would show me next. But for the first time, I was ready. When Jesus said, "I will show you everything," the scene around me began to change. But I was not plunged into darkness. I was not swallowed by silence. What enveloped me now was memory. Only it was not like remembering an old dream or watching an old movie. It was living it all over again. Only now, with new eyes, with understanding. I didn't just see what I had done. I finally saw why I had done it. And to my surprise, it wasn't my secret sins or major flaws that came to light first. What came to light were the moments I was most proud of. the best parts of my religious life, the pillars of my spiritual identity. I saw my fiery sermons, my eloquent public prayers, my early mornings standing reciting scripture, my firm leadership in the mosque, the counsel I gave to the youth, the fasts I observed during Ramadan, the corrections I made to those who strayed from orthodoxy. These were the things I believed made me worthy, the merits I thought I had accumulated before God, the proofs of my spiritual worth. But as these scenes unfolded, something in me began to crumble, not because of what I had done, but because of what was behind what I was doing. Jesus didn't need to tell me anything. He didn't even correct me with words. His gaze was enough, a gaze that made me see parts of myself that I had never had the courage to look at, parts that I didn't even know existed. I always thought my intentions were pure, but now I saw it with different eyes, and it hurt. I saw zeal that was actually pride in disguise. I saw reverence that was actually fear. I saw leadership that hid a desperate desire for control. I found myself preaching with passion, but realizing that deep down, what I wanted most was to be admired. I wanted to be seen as the one who had all the answers. It was more about upholding my role as an Imam than guiding someone to the heart of God. I saw prayers that seemed full of authority, but were empty inside, because deep down there was a terrible fear. Fear of appearing weak, fear of being questioned, fear of losing respect. I saw that much of my devotion was motivated more by fear than love. Fear of hell, fear of failure, fear of being rejected by God. Yes, I did the rituals. Yes, I fasted, I taught, I led. But what was inside me was a hidden desperation to maintain an image of holiness. Even though it took me further away from God, then it brought me closer to Him. And perhaps the most painful scene was seeing myself kneeling alone in the dark, with my forehead pressed against the carpet, reciting the verses with all devotion. That which had always seemed to me to be my most intimate moment with God now seemed cold to me. Because there, without Jesus saying anything, I understood. Even those prayers at times were empty of relationship. They were born of fear. Not the holy fear that brings people closer, but the terror of being wrong, the fear of punishment, the fear of not being enough. I knew the name of God, but I did not know God. And in the midst of it all, Jesus remained there, without condemning, without turning His face away. He looked at me with the patience of someone who had loved me all my life, even in my years of religious ignorance, even in my misguided good intentions. His presence was the truth, and only His presence transformed me. That's when the biggest realization of all dawned on us. Grace doesn't only appear when we fall into visible sins. Sometimes it comes to shatter our illusions of self-righteousness. And only when all of that falls away is there room for real life to begin. My entire life has been shaped by the fear of being wrong. I didn't seek truth out of love. I clung to what I had learned because I was terrified of finding out that it might not be solid. So I clung tooth and nail to what I had been taught. I memorized it. I taught it with conviction, not because I was pleased, but because I was terrified of emptiness. I never stopped. I never knelt down in silence and asked God, "Do I really know you?" I did not seek Him out of hunger. I just recited it, and I thought that was enough. I thought I was safe. I believed that my zeal was synonymous with salvation, that my faithfulness to the rules was proof of a transformed heart. But it wasn't. I was further from God than I ever imagined. Jesus, with a tenderness that seemed to pierce my soul, began to guide me through memories that I had discarded. Seemingly small moments, forgotten conversations, glances that lasted seconds. They were seeds planted by Christians who had crossed my path. Simple words, brief testimonies. Some spoke of Jesus not only as a prophet, but as a savior, as God. I listened politely, but my heart was already locked. I felt above them. I had arguments, I had theology. I didn't mock them, but I ignored them. I had already decided they were wrong before they even opened their mouths. Not because I was sure of the truth, but because I was terrified of what would happen if I started questioning my own. And then came the most uncomfortable revelation of all, the way I dealt with doubt. Whenever doubt whispered within me, I silenced it. I buried it under layers of recitations, rules, leadership postures. And when I saw doubt in the eyes of others, especially young people who came to me with sincere questions, with real dilemmas, I offered no depth. I offered formulas. I repeated doctrines. I responded with logic but without empathy. It wasn't out of malice, it was out of fear. Fear of appearing weak, fear of being unmasked, fear of realizing that deep down, my reputation was more sacred to me than the truth itself. Jesus then showed me the faces of these people, not in an accusatory tone, but as a mirror. They were broken people, people hungry for meaning. And I brought them into the structure, the ritual, the discipline, but not into the heart of God. I wasn't cruel. I just didn't have what they needed most. Because I myself didn't walk with God. I walked around him. I talked about him, even passionately, but his living, real, transforming presence that I had never known. It was all close to the language of faith, but far from the relationship he had always desired with me. And strangely enough, this revelation did not destroy me. It brought sadness, a holy sadness, deep sadness. Not the kind of shame that paralyzes, but a pain that purifies. Like tears that cleanse the eyes and allow the soul to see. For the first time I understood Jesus was not humiliating me. He was freeing me from lies I didn't even know I believed. Lies that use zeal as a disguise, devotion as a shield. And then came the softest and hardest blow. Jesus showed me how many times God had tried to reach my heart, and I didn't even realize it. Little moments, awkward silences after prayer, a restlessness in my chest when listening to a Christian song of praise, a dream full of light, an involuntary shiver when hearing someone say, "Jesus loves you," with such conviction, a simple Christian with shining eyes telling me that he knew the love of God. And I shut all of that out. I suppressed it. I ignored it. I labeled it as distractions. And I told myself, stay strong. Don't question it. Don't stray. But he was there, nearby, waiting, and I didn't even notice. "You were sincere," Jesus repeated, "but you are still far away, out of fear. Tradition and identity do not take you to the Father. Only I can." Those words were like an earthquake and a hug at the same time. Everything I thought I knew came crashing down, but not in an explosion. It came crashing down silently, like an old house that finally gives way, not to a storm, but to time. Because it was never built on rock. There I was, broken, but for the first time, with hope. I saw the emptiness inside me. Not an emptiness of knowledge, an emptiness of soul. I didn't need more rules. I didn't need more memorized verses. I didn't need more explanations. I needed him, just him. Jesus didn't talk like the religious leaders. He didn't lecture. He didn't argue. He just revealed. And each revelation was so vivid, so clear, so irrefutable that I had no way to hide. And then the scenery changed once again. Not because anything moved, but because I began to see. It was as if my spirit had been taken to another level of reality. A moment before, I was standing there before him, my eyes wet, my heart in ruins. And the next moment, I was standing before something I had never considered real. A cross, but not as a symbol, not as decoration, not as heresy as I had been taught, not as Christian error. It was truth, the most profound truth of all. The cross was not far away, nor was it just a memory of the past. It was alive, pulsing before me, not as wood, but as revelation, like the very heart of God opened before my eyes. Everything that had previously seemed incomprehensible now made sense. Layer by layer, that reality penetrated me. It was not an object, nor a doctrine. It was an eternal invitation. The cross was there, not as a distant symbol, not as a misunderstood theological idea. It was real, alive. It was the altar where the impossible became possible. And there, hanging between heaven and earth, Jesus did not seem defeated. Not for a second, even covered in blood, even nailed with nails, even breathing in pain. There was glory in every gesture, in every look, in every breath. The purest love I have ever felt did not come from a pretty word or a spectacular miracle. It came from that exact moment when he could have come down and didn't. He stayed. He chose to stay for me. And there, before that scene, I not only saw it, I felt it. I knew it. The weight that was upon him was mine, my unbelief, my spiritual arrogance, my empty preaching, my holy nights filled with coldness. It was all there, mixed with the sins of the whole world. And yet, he did not look away. He took it all, and he loved. He loved me. That's when I understood. The biggest mistake of my life hadn't been theological. It had been distance. I had lived far from the true God. I served him from afar. I revered him out of obligation. I was more afraid of him than I loved him. And there he was, not condemning, but offering reconciliation. The cross was not the end. It was the way back home. The beauty of the cross was not in its brutality, but in its surrender. Jesus was not defeated. He surrendered, not out of weakness, but out of strength, out of compassion. That blood spilled was not defeat. It was victory. Every drop was a voluntary act of eternal love. And then, without sound, without audible words, but like a voice that touched the center of my being, he said, "Grace." I didn't need to conquer. I just needed to believe. It was the first time in my life that I understood what this meant. It wasn't a religious contract. It was a divine embrace. It was as if heaven itself had come down to me and said, "Enough. You don't have to try to save yourself anymore. I've come for you." Jesus' love did not ignore me. It transformed me. I, who had tried so hard to justify myself with good deeds, now saw clearly no deed, no tradition, no spiritual position was enough to pay what my soul owed. Salvation was a gift, undeserved, scandalous, free, and at the same time, perfectly fair. Because the price had already been paid. When Jesus looked at me, that look held everything: mercy, truth, redemption. There was no need to run anymore, no need to hide. For the first time, I could rest. My heart, which had always hidden behind sacred texts, was now naked before the one who is the Word himself, and he did not destroy me. He healed me. There at the foot of the cross, I realized that everything I had placed at the center, the rituals, the purity, the orthodoxy, the reputation, was just a shadow. The cross was the substance. It was the place where the veil was torn, where the distance between the Holy One and the sinner was abolished, where God became man so that man could finally know God. And in that silence that came after the vision, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. There was no going back, because now I had found life. And then a phrase began to echo inside me like a soft thunder, a wave of truth. Perfect love casts out all fear. That was exactly what I was experiencing. Not a theoretical love, not a pretty idea about mercy, but a living, burning, real manifestation of a love that doesn't demand performance, that doesn't expect perfection, that simply comes, enters, heals, frees. Jesus' presence did not accuse me. It disarmed me. One by one, the bricks of the fortress I had built around my soul began to fall away. My theology, my tradition, my reputation, my sincerity, everything I had used to prove my worth. None of it could bridge the distance between me and the Father anymore. But He was there, not waiting for me to figure it all out, but offering me rest. He didn't want my performance. He wanted my heart. As I looked again at the images He showed me, the thirsty crowds, the fearful leaders, the silent seekers, something inside me broke again. A new kind of lament, deeper, more honest. It wasn't regret out of shame. It was compassion. For the first time, I cried not only for myself. I cried for all those who, like me, spent their lives trying to please God and never really knew Him. What was once pride turned to lamentation. What was once zeal turned to clamor, not for the lost out there, as I said in my sermons, but for the lost there inside, lost within religious structures, lost within faith itself. That's when I realized sincerity alone doesn't save anyone, because if being sincere was enough, then the cross would not be necessary. But it was precisely out of love for us, whether sincere or not, that the cross was essential. The truth of Jesus did not reject my story, it redeemed it. And it also redeemed the story of all those who seek, stumble, and sacrifice with tears in their eyes and weary hearts. Sincerity can lead us to the door of truth, but only the blood of Christ can get us through it. Jesus looked at me with such profound tenderness that it broke down what was left of my defenses, and he said, without having to raise his voice, "Now I call you to follow me in truth." At that moment, something changed inside me. I understood crystal clear that the gospel is not just for those who live far away, immersed in blatant errors. It is not just for the ignorant or visible sinners. It is for everyone, including the religious, for the devout, for those who fast, pray, kneel, memorize, for those who live within the walls of tradition, trying to make sense of a system that, no matter how much it promises, cannot save. And I was one of them. I was exactly who Jesus was looking for. With tears in my eyes, I remembered the young men who had prayed with me at the mosque, the women who had come to me with sincere questions, the elders who had thanked me for sermons that I now realized were incomplete. They were not my disciples. They were sheep without a shepherd, and Jesus was the shepherd who had always been searching for them. My heart broke again, because I understood that the same grace that reached me there, in that moment of divine revelation, was the same grace that Jesus wanted to extend to everyone, including, and perhaps especially, the most devoted, the most sincere, those who, like me, were lost, even though they thought they were right. And everything inside me screamed, "Lord, take me back, but not to the old religion. Take me to those who are still stuck in it. Let me show you what I have seen. Let me tell you what I now know." And he answered, not with words, but with that look that said it all. "This is what I called you for, because truth sets you free, grace transforms, and love, perfect love, casts out all fear." And that's when I realized something that surprised me. The judgment I had feared so much never came as anger. It wasn't condemnation, it wasn't a scream. What I felt there, before the absolute holiness of the Father, was something that no human language can accurately express. It was justice and mercy together. It was a light that exposed everything inside me without destroying me. Jesus stood between me and the Father, but not as an obstacle, as the mediator, as the one who had already borne all that I deserved. And it was then that I understood something even more profound. Jesus not only died for me, he intercedes for me. He is alive before the Father as my eternal defender. That's why I was able to stand there before glory without being consumed. At that moment, the words of the letter to the Hebrews ceased to be a memorized verse and became a living reality. We have a high priest who is touched with the feeling of our weaknesses. It was true. He knew of every failed attempt, of every blind zeal, of every obedience based on fear, and yet he was there, loving, paying, saving. There was nothing left inside me that wanted to resist. My soul, once built on traditions, beliefs, culture, and rules, was now completely exposed before the Creator, and yet I was loved. The Father didn't speak in audible words, but his presence said it all. He knew me. He always knew me. And even when I walked down crooked paths, even when I used his name without really knowing him, he loved me. For a brief moment, I saw my entire life through his eyes, not with contempt, but with a sadness filled with love. He didn't just want my obedience, he wanted my heart. And in that moment, my heart was finally his. I felt the presence of Jesus move beside me, not physically, but as something alive, real. And then he showed me something else. Faces, many faces, entire generations of people. Some I knew, others I had never seen, but all with eyes hungry for God. Some trapped in religions, others lost in philosophies, some even inside churches, but without ever having known the true gospel. And then Jesus said clearly, without even using words, "These are also the ones I died for." It is not enough to know the truth. Now you must live it, proclaim it. Go. It was a calling, a sending, a new beginning. I, a former Imam, shaped by tradition and sincerity, was now called not to deny my past, but to redeem it, to transform it all into a living testimony of the Son of God. The truth did not destroy me. It set me free. And now this truth needed to reach others, especially those who, like me, thought they were right, but were just sincerely lost. I looked back at the Father. Holiness was still overwhelmingly beautiful, but now, because of Jesus, it was also welcoming. For the first time, I understood what it means to have peace with God. It is not the absence of conflict. It is reconciliation. It is belonging. There, in that sacred moment, I knew I would never be the same again. The cross showed me the price. Grace gave me new life. The Father received me. And now the world needed to hear. No more religion, no more human effort, but the gospel, pure, powerful, sufficient. Jesus didn't just save me, he sent me. And that's how I found myself in a place where the physical no longer made sense, where what mattered was no longer what I saw, but what I had finally understood. There was no body, no visible form, nothing I could touch or describe in human words. But inside me, something happened, something more real than anything I had ever experienced. It was as if my entire being was bending, not to some outside force, but to a truth that welled up from within, irresistible. I was standing before something infinitely greater than myself, a glory so intense, so pure, so overwhelming, that even maintaining consciousness seemed impossible. There was no sound, there was no movement, but I felt, deep inside me, that everything was surrendering. Everything, every part of my existence. My mind, by reflex, began to prepare for the worst, for correction, for anger, for condemnation, because honestly, who was I to be there? I, full of pride, of certainties, of mistakes, of doubts that I hid out of shame. I, who had tried for so long to please God with my own efforts, fasting, discipline, knowledge, and now understood that none of that could save me. It was then that something absolutely unexpected happened. In the midst of that light that revealed everything, something greater than any human love enveloped me. It wasn't that vague and superficial love that people talk about so much. It was a love with weight, sacred, that didn't run away from my flaws, but welcomed them, and it did so with such tenderness that it made me tremble, not with fear, but with reverence, with profound humility, with a new sensation. I was being loved with everything that I was. This love didn't pretend I was worthy. It recognized who I was completely, and yet it didn't reject me. It didn't turn away. It said, without saying, "I know exactly who you are, and yet I will not abandon you." It was a holiness that didn't crush me, but restored me, a presence so absolutely pure that it laid bare every flaw, every misguided motivation, every hidden fear, and yet it didn't drive me away. And then, without a single word being spoken, a truth struck me with indisputable clarity. It did not come to my ears, but straight to the essence of my soul. No one comes to the Father except through my Son. This time, it was not Jesus who spoke. It was the Father himself, and it didn't sound like a threat, not like a punishment, but like a revelation, as if every doubt I had ever had shattered there in a single instant. Every attempt at argument, every intellectual defense, every religious explanation I had ever used to reduce Jesus to just a prophet disappeared. There, in the presence of the Father, with Jesus before me, I understood. He was not an option. He was not a good way. He was the way, the only way. The Father did not offer me another shortcut. He did not say that my effort was worth it as an alternative. He pointed to the Son, the bridge, the only possible connection between the human and the eternal. And in that moment, as if my spiritual eyes were truly opened, I saw Jesus and the Father were in perfect unity, not as two different ideas, but as one reality, eternal, inseparable. I thought back over my entire life, all the things I had done sincerely, all the years of service, all the times when I thought I was closer to God because of my dedication. And I saw with silent pain that none of that replaced what mattered most: Christ. It wasn't about merit anymore, or about deserving. It was about surrender, about finally stopping trying to justify myself and simply surrendering to the one who had already paid the price for me. There, enveloped in the light of the Father and the Son, I felt a peace unlike anything else. It was not the absence of pain, it was the absolute presence of belonging. It was the certainty that despite everything, I had been found, not as a defendant, not as a stranger, but as someone deeply loved and welcomed. That's when everything became clear. The path to God is not in rituals, nor in traditions, nor in endless efforts to be accepted. It is in Jesus, in the living Christ. Every doubt I carried, every fear of being rejected, every burden I thought I had to bear alone was melted away in that light. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. I just had to accept it. That love not only accepted me, it transformed me. The revelation of that moment became the anchor of my existence. I finally understood that being found by God is not a medal for those who get everything right. It is a gift given to the broken, to those who finally admit that they cannot do it alone. And then, in that sacred silence, with my heart exposed and my soul at peace, I left it all behind. Everything you thought you knew, everything that gave me identity, everything that held me back, and I surrendered totally to Jesus, the Son of the living God.